Welcome to Audiorama Onda Lectora. Make yourself comfortable and listen. Awakening the Divine Within, the God in You, by Prentice Mulford. This audiobook delves into the profound wisdom of Mulford as he reveals the inherent divinity within each individual.
In the vast universe of human existence, there is a deep and enigmatic mystery waiting to be discovered by those willing to venture within. Have you ever wondered if you possess a hidden power, a force capable of changing the course of your life and shaping your reality in surprising ways? Imagine a world where your thoughts are the driving force behind your successes, where your deepest desires become tangible manifestations, where the key to happiness and fulfillment lies within yourself. Today we invite you on a transcendental journey into the deepest part of your being, a journey that will unveil the best-kept secrets of your own mind. No matter who you are or where you come from, this exploration is available to all without restrictions or limitations. Here you will discover how your own psyche is the core of an immense power, a force that, once unleashed and understood, will allow you to transcend barriers that once seemed insurmountable. In this odyssey of self-discovery, you will immerse yourself in a world of infinite possibilities, where the mind becomes the ultimate tool for transformation and the achievement of your most ambitious goals. Join us in this fantastic adventure, where we will unlock the secrets of the human mind and guide you through a journey of self-discovery and personal growth. The God in You, Prentice Mulford. As a spiritual being, you are a divine manifestation within the vast universe of divinity, an eternal expression of benevolent cosmic force. As such a manifestation, you are a constantly evolving force, incapable of diminishment, ever destined to grow. Throughout past ages, throughout countless cycles of existence, your essence has undergone constant growth and development, molding and enriching your mind until it reached the level of wisdom you possess in the present. The power of your mind has gradually increased, acquiring its present quality and clarity through many more incarnations than you experience today. Each previous lifetime has unconsciously contributed to strengthening your mental capacity. Each mental challenge you face has a purpose: to overcome suffering, to master your desires, to develop new skills, to perfect your art or vocation, as well as to correct unsatisfactory mistakes and shortcomings. These inner battles are spiritual impulses that lead you toward a higher power and a deeper realization of your being. With this realization always comes happiness, for the ultimate purpose of life is to achieve fulfillment and joy. In the present, you are an amplified version of yourself, with every desired mental facet that belongs to you reaching unprecedented levels. The dissatisfaction you may experience regarding your imperfections are evidence of your inner growth. If your mind were not as perceptive as it is, you would not be able to recognize those flaws. You are not in the same place where you might have been in the past, in a state of complacency where you considered yourself perfect in every way. However, as you look at yourself now, you are aware that you have swung in the opposite direction. Your eyes have been opened to certain deficiencies, and they seem to be constantly increasing. But this is not so. The God who resides in you, the ever-growing power that dwells in you, has generated in you a sense of imperfection in your character. Although that sense of incompleteness was never so close to reaching relative completion as it is at this moment. The evidence of this lies in the fact that you can now see and feel what was previously unknown to you. It may be that within your mind there are compartments filled with negative thoughts and toxic emotions. Before you identified them, your situation was worse. As unpleasant as it may be for you, now that you have discovered them, you can be sure that they will be cleared out. In our mental architecture, there may be compartments where harmful thoughts and emotions proliferate, and you should not be discouraged when the God within shows you their existence. You need not say, "I am so imperfect that I am sure I will never be able to correct all my faults." In fact, you can do it, and you are already doing it. Every time your mind rebels against one of your faults, it is an impulse of the spirit forward. You just have to remember that you should not expect to correct them all in one moment, day, week, or year. There will always be times in the future when you realize where you need to improve. If you can visualize the possibility of being better, you must identify the flaw that needs to be changed, or in other words, you must visualize even greater growth, more significant expansion. You must seek a continual refinement of your character, an ever-increasing complexity in the distribution of the force that constantly flows to you. Then you will cease to worry about being such an imperfect creature when you discover how you will bring about that change. You are like one of the temples you build for God, and your splendor is constantly increasing. No talent ever stops growing. It is like a tree that continues to grow even in winter. If you are learning to paint, draw, act, speak in public, or any other skill, and you stop practicing it for a month, a year or two, and then resume it, you will discover in time that this talent has improved, that you have new ideas about it, and a greater power of execution. You may wonder what the purpose of life is. In a sense, you cannot chart your own path in life. There is a destiny that guides you, a law that governs you and leads you toward an ever-increasing and unlimited capacity for happiness as your inner power grows. You cannot stop growing, despite all appearances. The pain you have experienced is due to that spiritual growth that constantly pushes you toward that which causes you misery. In the end, you had to take that pain as a sign that you were on the wrong path and needed to change it as soon as possible. When you cry out loudly and sincerely to find the right path, there always comes an answer that points you in the right direction. It is a law of nature that every sincere call receives an answer. A true prayer request for anything always brings the needed supply. What then is the purpose of life? It is to extract the utmost happiness from it, to learn to live so that each day is looked forward to with the assurance that it will be filled with pleasure, or even more than the present day you are living. You must strip yourself of even the memory that time can slip through your fingers. You must give thanks for living, rise above sickness or pain, and use the power of spirit to command the body to feel no pain. You must control and direct your thoughts so that they always increase your power and are able to work and act independently, providing you with everything you need, whether it be food or clothing. All this can be achieved without resorting to theft or injustice to anyone, gaining power so that the spirit always revitalizes, strengthens, and rejuvenates the body. By using our power in this way, we prevent any part of us from weakening, withering, or deteriorating. We are always discovering new sources of enjoyment, both for ourselves and for others, being able to bring them happiness and usefulness so that our presence is always welcome. We seek to be no one's enemy, but everyone's friend. This is the destiny of life in those realms of existence, where people as authentic as we are and even more alive than we are have learned and continue to learn how to make the most of life. This is the inevitable destiny of each individual spirit. There is no escape from ultimate and lasting happiness as we grow in this and other existences. All the pains we suffer or have suffered are like nudges and nudges that keep us off the wrong paths, guiding us by the law. As we develop greater sensitivity, we understand more clearly the law that leads us away from pain and toward increasing happiness. We reach a state of mind in which living becomes an ecstasy. In that state, we lose track of time, just as we forget it when we are immersed in something that excites or amuses us, such as when we contemplate a play or enjoy an exciting show. Just as it is mentioned in the biblical record that a day can be like 1,000 years and 1,000 years like a day, the concept of nirvana in Hindu philosophy suggests all the possibilities of life that come to our planet. My sister represents that calmness, serenity, and confidence of mind that arises from the absolute certainty that every effort we make, every enterprise we undertake is destined for success. The happiness we experience in this moment is only the springboard that propels us toward greater happiness in the future. Imagine if you felt that your next trip abroad that you long for and desire is about to happen, just as you are now certain that the sun has risen this morning. If you knew with certainty that you were going to master and succeed in your own unique skill, whether it be painting, public speaking, acting, sculpture, or any art form, in the same way you now know you can walk downstairs, then you would feel no trepidation. In our perfected lives, we will understand this completely. We will know with absolute certainty that by focusing our mental force and thought on any goal, pursuit or project, we are activating the powerful attractive force of thought substance. In this way, we will attract to us the resources, opportunities, forces, or people necessary to carry out that plan. Now you worry very little about whether your telegram will reach its destination, because although you may not know much about how electricity works, you know that when it is applied in a certain way, it will carry your message. And you will have the same confidence in knowing that when you direct and regulate your thinking in a certain way, it will act in your favor and accomplish what you desire. Before human beings knew how to use electricity, it existed to the same extent and with the same power as it does today. However, as far as our living together was concerned, it was practically useless as a means of communication, as we lacked the knowledge to direct it. Similarly, the immense power of human thought is present among us today, but it is wasted because we do not know how to concentrate and direct it properly. In fact, we could say that it is worse than wasted. Out of ignorance and a lifetime of habit, we often direct our mental batteries in the wrong direction, sending out thoughts laden with ill will, envy, complaints, contempt, or some form of negativity. All of this constitutes a real element that we apply incorrectly and ignorantly and can hurt others, and will certainly end up hurting ourselves. Herein lies the foundation of every successful endeavor, whether in this existence or any other. We should never acknowledge with our thoughts the impossibility of something, nor should we dismiss or mentally rubbish what might seem like a far-fetched idea, for in doing so, we might not understand what opportunities we are closing the door to. Saying that something is impossible simply because it seems unattainable to us is simply a dangerous habit that leads us to reject every new idea. Our mind thus becomes a prison full of closed doors to the outside world, and we ourselves become the only prisoners. Everything is possible with God. God works in you and through you. To say impossible as to what you can achieve or become is like an act of denial. To deny the power of God to act through you is to deny the power of the infinite Spirit to accomplish far more than you can conceive of in your mind at this moment. When you say impossible, you are setting your relatively weak limits of understanding as the standard of the universe. This is as audacious as trying to measure infinite space with a simple ruler. Saying impossible and I can't makes you a present impossibility. This thought of yours is the greatest obstacle to the possible. You cannot stop it, for it will push you back. Resisting it is futile, for there is no successful resistance against the eternal and constant improvement of all things. You should say, "It is possible for me to become anything I admire." You should say, "It is possible for me to become a writer, a speaker, an actor, or an artist." Then you will open the door to your own temple of art within you. As long as you said impossible, you kept that door closed. Saying I can't was like an iron bolt blocking access, but saying I can is the power that unlocks that lock. The Spirit or Christ thought had the power to subdue the elements and calm the storm. Your spirit, as part of the greater whole, has the potential and is waiting to blossom. The same power, by concentrating the invisible element of your thought, was able to convert that invisible element and materialize the food, the loaves and the fishes. This is a power inherent in every spirit, and every spirit is evolving toward that power. Today you see a healthy child who cannot lift a small weight, but you know that within that weak and frail child lie the powers and possibilities that, 20 years from now, will enable him to lift any load with ease. Similarly, the greater and coming spiritual power can be anticipated for us, who at this time are relatively like infants in spiritual terms. The reason life can seem so unsatisfactory in this region of being is that, not knowing the law, we often go against it and experience its pains rather than its pleasures. The law cannot be fully learned from anyone's past records or experiences, no matter how much power they have attained. Those records or past lives may be valuable and suggestive, but while there are general principles that apply to everyone, there are also individual laws that apply to each separate, individualized person. You cannot directly follow my path to find happiness, nor can I follow yours, because each of us is made up of a unique combination of elements. These components have entered and molded our spirits, our real selves, throughout the ages of growth and evolution. You must study and discover for yourself what your own nature requires to achieve lasting happiness. You are like a book to yourself, and you must open its pages one after another, chapter after chapter, as you go through the experience of each day, month, and year. No one else can read that book for you but yourself. No one else can think exactly as you think, feel exactly as you feel, or be affected exactly as you are affected by the forces or people around you. It is for this very reason that no other person can judge what you really need to make your life more complete, perfect, and happy. Only you yourself know how you should do it. You must discover for yourself what relationships work best for you. What foods, what approach in business, art, or profession gives you the best results. It can be helpful to consult with others who have similar interests. The advice of those who are more knowledgeable about general laws can provide you with strength, courage, or new ideas for pursuing your ventures. Occasionally meeting with serious, sincere, and honest people who also have definite goals and talking to yourself and them can be beneficial. However, when you accept any man or woman as your infallible guide or authority and follow their instructions to the letter, you get off the main path. By relying on someone else's experiments based on a specific combination of elements or chemicals, you are adopting their results as the standard for your own unique combination of elements. Your combination may be very different and react differently to external elements. You have iron, copper, magnesium, phosphorus, and a variety of other minerals and chemicals in your physical body, more than Earth science has been able to imagine. In addition, in your spirit or thought, there are invisible or spiritual correspondences of these minerals, even more subtle and finer. All these elements are combined differently and in unique proportions in your physical and spiritual body. Therefore, only you can ascertain the peculiar action of your individual combination. There are general laws, but each individual must apply those general laws to his own life in his own unique way. For example, it is a general law that the wind can propel a ship, although each ship may use the air slightly differently. Likewise, it is a general law that thought is a force that can and does constantly affect others, even at a distance from our bodies. The quality of our thoughts and their power to influence outcomes depends largely on our associations. However, because of this reason, if your thought is superior or represents a higher power, and I see that you are progressing in the world by its use, I should not try to emulate your character or your way of life. I may try your methods as experiments, but I must remember that they are just that, experiments. I must avoid the common mistake of slavishly copying and worshipping someone else. On one occasion, Christ of Nazareth asked some of his followers not to worship him and said, "Do not call me good. There is no one good, only God." When he said, "I am the way and the life," according to my interpretation, he meant that, in regard to certain general laws which he knew and by which he was also governed as a spirit, he was willing to give certain information, but he never stated that his individual life, with all human experiences, was to be imitated strictly. If I turn in prayer to the infinite Spirit of good, asking for more strength and deliverance from sin and fear, at times when my spirit trembles at challenges, I humbly acknowledge that, as a powerful spirit, I need the help of other spirits. With full awareness of this, I refuse to present myself to my followers as God or the infinite. Instead, I urge them to direct their devotion to that omnipotent, eternal, incomprehensible power from which all good emanates, and which is accessed through prayer and the desires of the human mind. I urge you to worship God alone, the eternal and unfathomable power that is in constant motion in the limitless universe. This power, which no human being has ever seen or will ever see, except through its various manifestations in the sun, stars, clouds, wind, birds, beasts, flowers, animals, and human beings, who may become future angels or archangels, ascends to higher and higher degrees of mind and power. However, he always looks to the source from which his power emanates and never worships a form of expression over the Creator. This power is in constant activity today and manifests through every man, woman, and child on this planet. Or to use a biblical expression, it is God working in us and through us. We are all parts of this infinite power that leads us always to higher, more refined, and happier levels of being. Every man or woman, regardless of his or her way of life or degree of intellect, is stronger and better than he or she was before, despite any apparent contradictions that may arise. The desire to become more and more refined is inherent in human nature, and in all forms of nature or spirit that express themselves through matter. It is an unconscious desire to some extent. Even in the most degraded drunkard who is in decay, the inner spirit longs to come out of that state and work toward truth and improvement. This desire for God is at work even in those who might seem despicable and vile. When Christ was asked how many times someone should be forgiven for his or her offenses, his answer indicated that there should be no limit to the number of times a man or woman should forgive the shortcomings or immaturity of another. There should be no limits to the kind and helpful thought we direct towards someone who repeatedly falls or struggles with unnatural appetites. It is a great evil to judge an intemperate person and think, he is lost, there is nothing more to be done for him. In doing so, we emit a hopeless and discouraging thought into the atmosphere. When someone issues critical and unsympathetic judgments toward another person struggling on their path, that person may experience those judgments as an obstacle that slows down their progress in getting out of the swamp in which they are submerged. Similarly, similar thoughts of others have affected our own effort to get out of difficult situations or swamps we have been or are currently in. These swamps may include indecision, discouragement, bad moods, envious and hateful thinking, among others. However, the human spirit grows stronger as it fights against these obstacles. It becomes stronger as it confronts and combats its own critical and unsympathetic thoughts. Finally, it reaches a point where it can say to others with its thought, I prefer your approval to your censure, but I depend on neither, for my most relentless judge and my surest punishment for all the evil I do comes from my own mind. The god or goddess who resides in me, whose judgment and displeasure have no escape. However, as the spirit gains clearer insight, that inner judge becomes increasingly merciful to his or her own mistakes. This is because it understands that, in a sense, as we rise from a cruder to a more refined expression, we must face and overcome the defects that arise in the process. Every man and woman is predestined to face a certain amount of defects until the spirit overcomes them. In fact, they must do so, for it is the nature of the spirit to struggle against defects and to rise ever higher toward more power and happiness. If you use the idea of predestination as an excuse to commit sins or excesses, such as lying, stealing, or murder, and say, I can't help it, I am predestined to do it, you will still face consequences. You may not be punished by human laws, but natural or divine law has its own punishments for every possible sin, whether it is murder, lust, lying, stealing, evil thinking, or gluttony. These punishments are constantly applied, and many people suffer the consequences of the sins they commit because of their ignorance of the laws of life. The weight of these punishments has increased and affects many people, which has generated a greater desire to understand these laws. For this reason, this desire is being satisfied and these questions are being answered. It is an inevitable law of nature that what the human mind seeks, it eventually finds. The more minds search for answers, the sooner that search will be satisfied and the questions answered. Some years ago, the invention of steam satisfied to some extent the human desire for faster travel, while electricity answered the need for faster transmission of information between people. These are only steps toward the discovery and use of greater powers, not only in the elements external to the human being, but also in the invisible elements that make up human beings, such as you and me. In the future, our humanity will leave behind evil forms of expression, not out of fear of the punishments involved in breaking the law, but out of the wisdom of following the right path and the pleasure that comes from obeying the law as we understand it for ourselves. You will eat in moderation because experience has taught you that the greatest pleasure comes from moderation. You will be kind and considerate to your friends, not because you fear losing their friendship if you are not, but because you will find pleasure in acting kindly. In the past, both human laws and interpretations of divine law were often based on fear of punishment. God was depicted as a stern, merciless, and vengeful deity, and punishment was emphasized. However, as humanity has evolved and become more conscious, it has begun to understand that it does not need punishment as a motivation. Now, humanity is awakening and becoming more sensitive, and no longer needs to be driven in the right direction through fear of punishment. Instead, it is guided and drawn toward goodness, purity, and refinement through the increasing pleasures it experiences as it becomes more refined. The warning of punishment was necessary in the past when humanity was more cruel and less developed in its understanding. At that time, it could only be kept on the right path through punishment. But now, as our perception and understanding grow, we no longer need punishment, any more than one man needs another with a club to motivate him to move. The healing and renewing force of spring affects our bodies in their growth and changes, under the same laws and elements that govern the growth of other living things, such as trees, plants, birds, and animals. At the beginning of spring, every year, a force coming from the sun arrives and acts on our planet, affecting all organized life forms. This force is especially important for the human being, who is the highest, most complex, and powerful mental organism on Earth. The human being absorbs most of this force and will continue to do so in the future, gaining greater benefit as he learns to place himself in optimal states to receive it. Material science refers to this force as heat, but the quality known as heat is only its outward or physical manifestation. This force from the sun does not become heat until it reaches our planet and acts upon the terrestrial elements. Within a few kilometers of the Earth's surface, there is little or no heat. If this force were to manifest itself in the form of heat at sunrise or during its passage, the air on mountaintops would be as warm as in the valleys. However, we know that on the highest peaks, snow and ice are perpetual because the force of the sun at that altitude does not mix sufficiently with the elements of the earth to convert into heat to the degree felt in the valleys and plains. This force of the sun causes increased movement and circulation of sap in the trees, which begin their life cycle when the New Year's sun acts upon them. The sap is essential for the life of the tree and gives rise to its buds, flowers, and fruits. In addition, this invisible force of the sun helps trees to extract new nutrients from the soil through their roots and to shed dead leaves left over from the previous year, as can be seen in oak or hickory forests. This force of the sun also acts in the late winter and early spring months on animals and birds, especially when they are in their wild or natural state. This causes them to shed their fur or feather coats. However, this shedding of the old visible matter is only a relatively small part of the change that occurs within them. In addition to the shedding of the visible matter, there is also an expulsion or shedding of the old invisible matter throughout the body of the bird or animal through pores or other ducts, in various forms, some visible and some invisible. This is followed by the arrival of new elements on the inside, as the new fur, hair, or feather grows on the outside. Your own body is governed by the same law. During the late winter and early spring months, you experience a renewal, discarding old and dead matter to make way for the new. If you allow this force to act in you in the best possible way, you will learn to rest and disconnect, either mentally or physically when necessary, just as birds and other animals do during their period of renewal. The strength you receive at this time is invisible to the physical eye, as it is a form of energy. The new coats, feathers, skins, inner and outer tissues of your body, as well as the new shoots, leaves, and branches, are tangible manifestations of this force. They are crystallizations emerging from an invisible solution of chemicals in which birds, trees, and your own body are immersed. Everything that was absorbed from the previous year, as well as the elements present in that solution, have been exhausted and spent. Comparatively, the tree or other visible entity, like the metal that is immersed in a mineral solution and attracts the crystallizations that form in it, is related to this coated solution. The distinction between what we consider matter and spirit is not clear. Matter is but a temporary manifestation of spirit or thought that can be perceived by the physical eye. It is similar to a lump of coal which, when ignited, releases the force contained in it to move a machine. Then, most of that lump of coal is converted into invisible elements. In our environment, force constantly fluctuates between physical visibility and invisibility, and vice versa. For example, millions of tons of invisible matter may be suspended above us for an hour, but the next day they may fall in visible form as rain or snow, and a few hours later, they may be lifted up again even though they remain invisible. The most perfect crystallizations of mineral elements come from solutions that are in a state of calm and stillness. Your body follows the same law during this renewal and recrystallization in the spring of its elements. To take full advantage of the benefits of spring's warm, revitalizing influence, it is important to rest whenever you feel the need, whether during the day or at night. Forcing your muscles to work against their natural inclination simply by force of will is not the best way to harness this springtime power. If you work your mind or body so hard that it drives you to total exhaustion, without being aware of how exhausted you are until you have finished your task, as countless people do and are forced to do, you are preventing the full healing and revitalizing force from acting to its full potential in your body. You are hindering the assimilation of the new element that is renewing the tree and allowing the buds to grow, to integrate into your organism. You are holding on to a depleted element that should be eliminated, similar to how an oak tree sheds all its dead leaves before the winter is over. Instead of accepting the new and superior vitality, you take with you a ballast in the form of dead matter. This is one of the reasons, among others, that weakens human beings, causes graying of the hair and wrinkling of the skin. The decay of the physical body, which we know as old age, is entirely due to the fact that people do not believe and do not know that they can place themselves in a suitable condition to receive a constant flow of energy, which would renew and strengthen their spirit with new material. Mere muscular strength and constant activity of the body are not always indicative of optimal health. In times of fever, for example, a normally weak person may need the support of 2 or 3 people to stand. Once the fever passes, he or she is weakened like a child, although under normal conditions, once the crisis is over, he or she is considered out of danger. Similarly, in the world of business and fierce business competition, many people lead a feverish life full of excitement. They are always in tension and demand to be kept in that state. They cannot work if they do not feel, to some extent, in constant tension. If sometimes, due to the necessity of their own nature, their nerves relax and they feel languid, they misinterpret this friendly sign as a form of illness and decide to take action. Even in situations where people are forced to stay in sickbeds for weeks or months, being cared for as if they have a serious illness and believing in the seriousness of their situation, they sometimes emerge at the end in a better and more strengthened state than in a previous long period. Why does this happen? It is because through the forced interruption of physical or mental activity, nature itself works in the same way it would in unfavorable circumstances to rebuild a worn-out body. As a result, the person recovers with new vitality in his or her bones, muscles, and nerves. Nature can take advantage of this period of rest and calm to carry out the necessary repairs. If you regard this idea of the renewing power of spring with respect, even if you cannot fully believe it at first, you will receive much benefit from entertaining it with respect. For if you do not reject a truth when it is first presented, it will take root and flourish in your mind, proving to be very beneficial. Human beings, because of constant physical exertion, wear out much sooner than is generally believed. The endurance of the rough sailor, as a rule, lasts only a few years, and he often becomes an old man at the age of 45. The hard-working farmer, who toils all the year round from dawn to dusk and considers work the greatest virtue in the world, often becomes a mass of bones and rheumatism at 50. The average life expectancy of hard workers is much shorter than that of those engaged in occupations requiring less physical exertion and less constant stress. When the body is genuinely exhausted, as I was able to observe in the mines of California, where I spent years working with picks and alongside teams of men lifting, moving, and fighting, I noticed that the last 3 hours of a 10 or even 12-hour workday were performed by the men, no matter how strong, with much less enthusiasm than in the previous day's work. In fact, it was often only a semblance of work, unless the watchful eye of the boss was constantly on his men. Why? Because physically, they were no longer fit to work. It was only the will that pushed the muscles to the effort. The sturdy, hardy miners of 25 years of age or more who worked like this in 1860 and who persisted in that back-breaking work, the great majority have died. And of those living today, 4/5 of them are physically broken men. In the kingdom of nature, we find periods of rest constantly alternating with periods of activity. Trees rest during the winter. The circulation of sap is slow. There is no creation of leaves, flowers, or fruits. Birds and wild animals, after the summer breeding season, only eat and sleep. Some animals and reptiles even sleep throughout the winter, and the earth itself must rest to give the best harvest. When forced through constant fertilization artifices, the resulting product is of inferior taste and nutritional quality than that grown in virgin soil. Diseases, pests, and destructive insects are unknown to vegetation in its natural state. When human beings become aware that they cannot make demands on their bodies year after year, from youth to 40 or 50 years of age, nor withstand constant and intense pressure of nerves or willpower without serious damage, then they may realize that by allowing themselves states of rest and receptivity, as trees and animals do in their natural state, they will be able to receive much more of this element. As a result, they will enjoy much greater bodily health, greater muscular elasticity, vitality, and mental clarity. In addition, they will awaken in them senses and powers that the rest of the people do not know or doubt of their existence. Some Oriental and Indian races have, to a certain extent, the use of these senses and faculties due to a more restful life, and the fact that they live, like trees and animals, in conformity with the influence of the seasons. They do not have our dominant and aggressive force which invades and conquers for a time, as England has conquered India, and our own people have subdued and almost exterminated the Indians. But notice, this force does not conquer in the end. The power of thought, which works most, while the body is relatively inactive, is really the strongest that finally prevails. It is subtle, silent, and invisible, working with the highest motive, refining and polishing the rude, warlike, conquering races, grafting upon them the civilization of the conquered. Thus the art and civilization of conquered Egypt were transferred to Syria centuries later. The Assyrians, after being conquered, transferred this power to the conquest of Greece. Greece fell before Rome, but Greek civilization prevailed in the Roman city. Rome fell physically to the Goths and the Vandals and the savage races of northern Europe at that time. But in the realm of the mind, it is the influence of ancient Italy that has been the great factor in reining in the Goth, the Hun, and the Vandal of centuries ago. In the modern German, French, Spanish, and Italian, every convulsion, upheaval, and conquest has made this power settle in a wider field. Today, the best English mind is studying very seriously the laws it has at last recognized in India, and that power is going to subdue, in a sense, England. For she is already sitting at the feet of India, receiving her first lessons in the alphabet of laws and force, hitherto unrecognized by her sages. What power is this, you ask? How is it gained? How is it developed? It is the power coming from minds united in one purpose, in perfect accord, and which do not use all in physical activity. For if you put all your thought and strength into the work of the limbs of your body, into working with your hands day after day, year after year, without regard to the impulses and instincts of the times or the seasons, then you keep all that strength working only in the instrument, the body, and you end by wearing it out. You prevent it from working at a distance from the body. You also prevent the influx and assimilation of this recuperative force of spring. You create the habit of keeping the body always in motion. You prevent yourself from obtaining that order of sleep, which would give your body the greatest strength for the waking hours. For if the body and mind are fatigued day after day, the same order of thought prevails and fatigues it. At night, the belief and error is formed that nothing has been accomplished if you do not work with the body. The brain cannot be a part of that state of rest when your power of thought could work at a distance and separate from your body, which could bring you in time a result 100 times more beneficial than can be realized by mere physical effort. The quality in the leaf, root, or seed of the plant, which, when taken as medicine, acts upon the internal organs, is the force in that plant released through the digestive process. The force obtained from bread or meat is the force released from the food. Digestion is a slow combustion of matter taken into the body, just as coal is burned in the furnace. And the force released by such combustion is used to work the body, just as the engineer uses heat to run the engine. The newer the bud, the more tender will be its outer material formation, but that bud, when used medicinally, contains the strength and the most active principle and quality of the plant. Tea is made from the tenderest buds of the plant. In California, the poison oak bud affects some people, even if they are only near it. That is how great a noxious force the air sends out. The tender shoots of spring contain that force, which will later make the leaf or branch more solid in your own organization. In the spring, there are the same tender elements. Therefore, if your body is weak in spring, it is a sign that the new shoots, so to speak, are forming inside, and they are full of strength. But that strength has not had time to act upon your material organization and form the new bone, muscle, and sinew, which will come at a later period. Provided such sprouting or new crystallization is not stirred up, disturbed, and possibly destroyed by undue exertion of mind or body, where the same relative damage is done to your body as would be done to a tree by a hurricane. Possibly you say, but how can I carry on my business and earn my bread if I put my body to the repairs of nature? I answer this. The laws of man's business are not the laws of nature. If nature says rest and man says work, and goes to work or must work, man always gets the worst of it. What society calls vicious practices or habits are not the only agents that bring disease, pain, and death. Thousands of people die annually in prolonged agony, in respectable beds, and in the best society. Consumption, cancer, insanity, dropsy, rheumatism, fevers, and rabies always wreak havoc among the most conventionally correct people. Why is this? If in your present life situation you find it impossible to have the necessary rest and feel intensely that need for pause, trust that your persistent desire, prayer, or urgent demand to receive and harness the restorative forces of nature will afford you the opportunity to do so. When any need is deeply felt, the thought and desire that arises from such a feeling is itself a prayer, a force that will bring help and pull you out of harmful environments and ways of life. This affirmation should be repeated regularly, for it is the main source of all growth and progress toward a happier and healthier life. The Christ of Judea embodied this great law in the words, "Ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened to you." Wisely, I refrain from seeking to explain this mystery by which sincere human thought, desire, or aspiration always brings in time the desired thing or result. For this and other mysteries are inexplicable, and no sooner is a supposed cause given for a certain result in the workings of nature than we find a deeper mystery in the cause itself. We say that the wind is air in motion, but what factor sets it in motion and keeps it so? We once explained the tides by the theory of the attraction of the moon, but apart from the tides, what power keeps in motion the gigantic system of currents that ever traverse the oceans? This has been revealed more clearly during the last 40 years. What power keeps our lungs breathing day and night, and the blood rushing to every part of the body? Are they not all the power of God or Spirit, or the infinite force of good at work in us, as it does in everything that lives and grows? We alone have been granted the necessary knowledge with which to work intelligently with this power. The body of the tree and the animal decays in the end for lack of such intelligence. Thus, in the past, the material part of man has decayed, although this will not always be so. The last great enemy to be destroyed, says Paul, is death, which implies that as man's knowledge and faith in the wonderful forces around him increase, he will discover how to place himself in the line of action of these forces, and in so doing he will make the mortal part immortal. We believe that immortality in the flesh is a possibility, that is, that a physical body can be retained as long as the spirit desires its use, and that this body, instead of diminishing in strength and vigor as the years pass, may increase and its youth be perpetual. We believe that the fables of the ancient mythologies, which refer to immortals or to beings possessed of powers distinct from and superior to mortals, have a basis in reality. This possibility must come in accordance with the law that every demand or prayer of mankind must bring with it a supply. There is now a more fervent demand than ever for a longer and more perfect physical life, because more minds now see the greater possibilities of life and appreciate more than ever the value of living in the physical. That demand often takes this form of expression: I have just learned to live and it is almost time to die. The body will grow to achieve these results through a gradual series of spiritual processes that operate and are ever-changing, spiritualizing and refining matter. These processes do not retain the body a person may now have. They retain a body, and one that is ever-changing and refining. Every illness, lack of physical ease or infirmity comes from a spiritual process whose goal is the reconstruction of the physical body. First in the reception of new elements, and second in the expulsion of the old ones. However, behind this physical reconstruction is taking place a much more important reconstruction of the spirit, from which the body is built. These processes are continually at work with the body, operating through the skin, the stomach, and other organs, as well as in the periods of physical procrastination or indisposition mentioned above. Every disease represents the effort of the renewed spirit to attract a new and fresh influx of force, to cast off the old and relatively dead matter. But as this intention has not been recognized by the race, the spiritual process or effort with the accompanying pain and discomfort has been regarded and feared as a sign or approach of death. Thus, without knowledge of spiritual law and judging everything by the material, the temporary and necessary weakness of the body that accompanies the process has been considered an unmitigated evil. The past belief reinforces the false idea that, in time, the physical body inevitably ages, withers, weakens, and finally perishes, without any power in the universe being able to prevent it. The body is continually changing its elements in accordance with the condition of the mind. In certain mental conditions, it is adding to itself elements of decay, weakness, and physical death. In another mental condition, it is adding to itself elements of strength and perpetual life. What the spirit assumes in both cases are thoughts or beliefs. Thoughts and beliefs materialize in flesh and blood. Belief in inevitable decay and death brings from the spirit to the body the elements of decay and death. Belief in the possibility of a constant inflow to the spirit of life brings life. If new life is added to you, there must also be a shedding of old or relatively dead matter from the body. Just as a tree is freed of withered leaves when spring comes, thanks to a new stream of life energy, so animals and birds annually change their old fur or plumage for new. This natural process entails transformations in the entire structure of the animal or human being. This spiritual law operates in all forms of life, from the crudest manifestation of matter. In the case of the human being, this influx of spiritual energy is even more prominent than in the lower forms of life. Although it is not distributed equally among all people, some receive more than others. However, as humanity advances, individuals will emerge who receive such an influx in abundance and will be compelled to explore new possibilities of existence and manifest them in their reality. When our higher minds receive and incorporate new ideas or thoughts, our lower minds, rooted in the material, often resist and fight against them. The body becomes the battleground where these two forces clash, and consequently, it is the body that experiences suffering. As minds learn to trust, however partially, in a supreme power and begin to consider the possibility that illness and physical death are inevitable necessities, the higher power will prevail. Old errors will be abandoned and new ideas will take root. With each successive struggle, the body will grow stronger and better, and in time, these struggles will diminish in intensity until they disappear altogether. In the past, people used to lose their physical bodies because of their lack of knowledge about the necessary process of disease, which allows the spirit to free itself from old material beliefs and adopt new ones. They made the mistake of clinging to outdated thoughts and, as a result, used their energies incorrectly. Belief is what keeps the process going. Your belief can turn disease into a benefit or an evil. Holding the belief that illness is a spiritual process of discarding old and worn-out elements contributes greatly to the mind performing this process. On the other hand, if you believe that illness is simply a physical condition with no associated benefit, you are using your energy to burden the spirit with more errors, which will ultimately be reflected in the flesh and blood. Ultimately, your spirit will rebuild the body it has been trying to carry and abandon its burden, just as it rejects a body part when that part is spiritually dead. By dismissing the idea that your physical body can become perpetual by a constant renewal of its substance, you are closing the door to life and opening another door to decay and death. We are not saying that you should believe this right away, as your current mentality may not allow it. There are many things that may happen in the future, and we may not currently have the capacity to believe in them. However, if you desire it and consider something seemingly impossible to be desirable, you can pray or demand faith that gives you a reason to believe. Faith means having the ability to believe the true and to receive true thoughts into your mind. Columbus's faith in the existence of a new continent was a power that helped him to keep his idea, an idea that was greater than that of others in his time. Those people who have confidence in themselves have real power to carry out their projects, greater power than those who have no confidence in themselves. When you demand to have faith in possibilities that seem new and strange to you, you also demand the power and ability to attract the capacity to see or understand reasons and truths that are unknown to you. If you persist in seeking the truth and nothing but the truth, you will find it, and having access to all truth gives you the power to accomplish what seems impossible. Your faith has healed you, said the Christ of Judea to a man who was healed of his ills. In this context, we interpret that the healed person had an innate power to believe that he could be healed. This power, which emanated from his own spirit and not from Christ, acted in his body in a way that instantly healed his diseases. Christ was a means of awakening that power in that person's spirit, but he did not give him that power, for it lay dormant in the healed individual. Christ brought it to life, and probably only to a temporary life and activity, for we have no record that any of the cases of instantaneous healing at that time were permanent. These people became ill again and eventually lost their bodies. Why? Because the faith or power they attracted for a brief time did not stay with them. They had not learned to cultivate it continuously by constantly seeking supreme power. Their spirits again fell under the influence of material beliefs, when those beliefs generated a burden difficult to bear on their spirits, and as a result, they found themselves sick. They had no one like the Christ to awaken that temporary faith or power in them. No person can become permanently whole, which implies, among other things, immortality in the flesh and complete freedom from disease. To achieve this, it is necessary to always trust and depend upon the Supreme, to obtain the power of faith without depending upon others. In this respect, every mind must be completely alone. You cannot obtain the supreme power if you constantly depend on the help of others. If you do, you are simply borrowing or absorbing someone else's faith. That borrowed faith may work wonders for a while, but it will not be permanent. When the bond with what you have borrowed from is severed, you will fall back into despair and sickness. In reality, you have never borrowed from the right source, the Supreme. The most beneficial demand or prayer for us, whether expressed consciously or unconsciously, is that which seeks to strengthen our faith constantly. When you decide to change your mental approach to illness and firmly believe that it is an effort of the spirit to free itself from the errors of thought you have accumulated since childhood, something begins to change. Little by little, you stop carrying those errors and begin the process of liberation, discarding all the old errors of thought. The illness you experienced many years ago, due to the fear of death, somehow encapsulated the specific memory of the emotional state of fear in your being, along with the belief that accompanied that memory. Throughout all these years, that belief has been working against you, just as any erroneous belief works against one. It is literally a part of your real self. Since all past individual memories and experiences are a literal part of your present self, they remain in your spiritual memory, even though the material memory has faded. This memory is a reality in thought, but it is the memory of a false belief that death and decay cannot be overcome. The change in your mentality and state of mind will expel this belief, but this expulsion must have a corresponding manifestation in the physical body. The physical manifestations of all your old ailments, such as colds, fevers, and others, must vanish. At first, this may be challenging, but gradually they will manifest in a modified form. At that point, you are freeing yourself from your old erroneous beliefs. However, if you do not reverse your belief and continue to regard physical decay and death as immutable, then with each illness in such a state of mind, you add another error, another falsehood, another burden to your accumulation of delusions. This cumulative effect, along with the rest, weakens, crushes, and ultimately causes the degradation of the body. In physical life, there is no time too late to receive or accept the truth. There is no stage too late for that truth to begin its process of physical renewal. And although that particular physical life may not be prolonged indefinitely, the spirit, by receiving such truth, acquires a strength that will be of incalculable value on the invisible side. With that help, the spirit may be able to build for itself a more perfect spiritual body. The most remarkable thing about the relatively perfected spiritual body is the ability to grow and live in the physical and spiritual realms of existence. If you cling to the idea that humanity will go on forever as in the past, losing their bodies and without the power to maintain those bodies in perfect health, you are limiting your perspective. There are higher possibilities and deeper truths to which you can open yourself if you are willing to believe and receive. Then you set your belief against the eternal fact that all things on this planet are always moving toward greater refinement, greater powers, and greater possibilities. Medicine and material remedies can help a great deal in the process of expulsion. A skilled and understanding physician of any school can be of great help. It all depends on the mind and belief with which you take the medicine and follow the doctor's advice. If you regard both the medicine and the physician as helping your spirit to shed a burden and build a new body, you are providing a great help to the spirit for its liberation and renewal. However, if you believe that the medicine and the physician are merely props for the body, and that the body is destined to weaken and perish sometime during the next 30, 40, or 50 years, then you are holding on to the belief in error faster than you shed it. This burden will eventually become too heavy for the spirit to bear. This causes the man or woman to age prematurely, with drooping shoulders, weak knees, and a staggering gait, because they believe only in the earthly and perishable. The spirit is not earthly and perishable, although you can burden it with material thoughts that will drag it down to earth. With such a burden, it is not the physical body of the old man that is bent and bowed, but the force that moves the body, i.e. the spirit, burdened with material thoughts that it can neither release nor assimilate. The body is always an external reflection of the mind or spirit. A body that is renewed, beautified, refreshed, and strengthened means a mind that is renewed with new ideas, plans, hopes, purposes, and aspirations. Eternal life is not the half-dead life of extreme old age. The person who focuses only on the physical and temporal aspect of life, who believes that the body is affected only by the amount of food and drink he consumes, and who maintains that the body is nourished only by the forces generated within itself, without considering the influence of an invisible element coming from the spiritual realm, is limiting his understanding to what he can perceive with his physical senses. In other words, this person focuses on matter, which is always temporary and perishable, attracting to himself the forces and elements that cause impermanence and decay. These act in his body, manifesting those same characteristics. The death of the body begins long before it reaches the grave. A pale face and withered skin are signs of a skin that is in the process of dying. That is, a part of the body in which the spirit works to eliminate the old and take in the new imperfectly. In infancy and early youth, the spirit expels and takes in more strongly, but over time it absorbs falsehoods. Its growth and awareness slows, and response to physical changes becomes slower. The body begins to show signs of aging, that is, deterioration, because the spirit is nourished less and less by the element that brings the constant renewal of new thought, which is new life. The belief in weakness and decay is so ingrained in humanity that wisdom is often allegorically represented as a gray-haired old man, hunched over and supported by a cane, symbolizing a wisdom that cannot prevent its own body from wasting away. In contrast, in childhood, a spirit or mind that has taken possession of a new body possesses a greater spiritual wisdom than when the child is physically more mature. It is intuitive and subconscious wisdom in action. For a period, the individual is more receptive to the truth, and so, up to the age of 18 or 20, the processes of spiritual detachment and assumption with the body take place more efficiently. These relatively rapid changes in physical appearance maintain the vitality and freshness of youth. However, over time, the higher spiritual process begins to gradually diminish. False beliefs, whether taught or absorbed from others, materialize in the body, despite the resistance of the higher mind expressed in the form of pain and disease. The burden of belief in the earthly and ephemeral accumulates. The body begins to reflect this mentality. Finally, the higher mind refuses to bear such a burden any longer, sheds it, and leaves a lifeless body. The death of the body is, therefore, the final process in which the spirit frees itself from superfluous elements that can no longer be used or incorporated. It would be desirable, however, if the spirit could retain a physical body capable of refinement, just as the spirit perfects itself. For in that parity of refinement between the spirit and its instrument, a great increase in happiness is experienced. The full development of our faculties cannot take place until this union between spirit and body is achieved. When the Christ of Judea said to the elders of Israel concerning the little child, "Except you become like this child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven," he meant to convey, in our interpretation, that they should be as receptive to this influence of force as was the spirit of the child at that period of its life. If this influence could be maintained, the youthfulness of the body would be perpetual. The child is more spirit-led than the adult, more authentic. He is not concerned with politics and openly shows whom he likes or dislikes. He often possesses a keener intuition. He does not feel affinity for a bad person when his parents perceive nothing negative in him. He has an instinctive understanding of life that exceeds what his parents can imagine, even if he cannot put these thoughts into words. Even so, those thoughts remain latent. She has not yet learned to adapt to the double standards of the world, where people smile in your presence but criticize behind your back. For a while, it is relatively free to express its spirit without inhibition. When the spirit loses its freedom of expression and we start pretending to be what we are not, when we say yes when we really mean no, when we show a facade to gain favors, when we repress anger, disappointment, or irritation, and pretend to be satisfied and happy instead, we move away from our authentic nature. We become insensitive and, over time, repress our higher senses and spiritual faculties. We lose the ability to discern truth from falsehood and to experience spiritually what faith really means, much less to draw to ourselves this essential and indispensable power. Without this power of attraction, the physical body becomes a burden to the spirit. It is not the body that abandons the spirit, but the spirit that rejects the material body. By casting off unbelief, your spirit becomes more receptive to true thoughts and things, which gives it greater power, and enables it to operate in all parts and functions of the body. The process of detachment, as occurs in youth, allows the spirit to reject through the physical senses of touch and taste anything that is harmful or adulterated to it. The spiritual power can become so great that if, accidentally, poison were placed in the mouth, it would be detected and rejected at once, or if swallowed, it would be expelled from the stomach at once. It is not the physical stomach that rejects inappropriate food or expels harmful substances. It is the spirit that guides the organ, for it possesses an innate knowledge that the substance is not suitable or beneficial. There is nothing in the rejected element that the spirit can assimilate or utilize for its good. As the spirit grows stronger, its sensitivity to everything that could harm you, whether visible or invisible, increases and becomes more acute. When you approach the presence of something malicious, the spirit rejects it and instantly warns you about people's evil intentions and the plots they are scheming. It will guide you to what is safe and appropriate in your interactions. Finally, it will reject or refuse to receive the bad thoughts that often come unconsciously as they poison the spirit. As faith grows, the spirit will summon various material aids that will contribute significantly to the renewal processes. These aids will influence the selection of food, the choice of appropriate relationships, and other changes in habits and customs. However, the spirit must be the director and motivator of these material aids. When the impulse comes, you will be obliged to follow it. You will not consume foods which you should avoid. Your own taster will reject them. You will not keep harmful company. Habits that need change will easily and quickly disappear. But if you impose strict rules in these matters, in the hope that your material self will become more spiritual, you are allowing your material self to take control. The material or lower mind is trying to dictate laws and refinements to the spiritual or higher self. Let the spirit, empowered by faith, do the work. When the time comes to reject any animal food or any gross element in any form, you will have lost the desire and taste for them. When we affirm our belief in the possibility of immortality in the flesh, we are not saying that anyone living in a physical body should immediately strive to attain it, nor are we claiming that it is something impossible to achieve. We are simply arguing that it is an outcome that sooner or later will unfold as part of the evolution and growth of the spirit from its most primitive state to its most refined expression. This process has always been underway on this planet and in all forms of matter. Matter is essentially spirit, temporarily manifested so that it is perceptible to our physical senses. As we strengthen our faith in these spiritual processes of shedding the old and embracing the new, and as a result, bring about a further refinement or spiritualization of the accompanying body, we are providing assistance to those closest to us in the invisible realm of life. As we become more spiritual in our physical existence, we help those beings manifest more tangibly in the material world. In other words, we become more physically perceptible to one another. The elements we discard in our material thoughts contain components that can be useful in achieving greater materiality. Your spiritual bodies are also subject to the same laws in terms of the process of detachment and adoption. What we reject as useless is for them the most valuable, the most suitable for us. We spiritually absorb these elements, which serve us as spiritual food and represent life. Through what we throw away, they help us to spiritualize our body, and through what we discard, we give them help to materialize the spirit. The attraction of aspiration is the reason why we cannot maintain a constant state of mental serenity. Even if you find yourself in a favorable position according to your ideal of life, you are still influenced to a greater or lesser extent by the discord that prevails around you. You show compassion and humanity towards the animal creation, but you witness how wild birds, your pets, and the animals that come to build their nests in the trees are hunted for sport or profit in front of your eyes, and you cannot help it. You live in an environment marked by cruelty and constant killing. Animals raised by man are kept in artificial conditions, resulting in their development in an unnatural and detrimental way for entertainment or profit. This applies to all forms of husbandry. Nature, when allowed to take its course, does what is best for the birds or animals, and they have individual rights just as humans do. Imposing tastes by force leads to the development of diseased organs, such as an enlarged and diseased liver in a goose, just to create a particular dish. Their breeds are being bred in the midst of disease. Disease leads to unhappiness, both mental and physical, directly and indirectly. This unhappiness also affects you. If you are a more sensitive and spiritually open person, you are likely to be affected by the afflictions that surround you when you travel abroad, experiencing mental or physical pain. Your homes, automobiles, and boats are often overheated in winter, emitting noxious fumes derived from the fuels used and the fumes from the human bodies present in them. You may be forced to sleep in rooms that rely in part on this unhealthy heat to keep you warm during rest. You must inhale it while you are in an unconscious state of recovery and awaken with these substances incorporated into your being. You are also exposed to consuming rancid, spoiled food in high-class restaurants. Scenes of cruelty, brutality, and injustice affect you deeply. This type of predominant thinking is active in the atmosphere surrounding crowds and has an impact on your own thinking. In every material object that surrounds you, there is a type of thought, or rather, an embodied mental action, and the quality of that thought varies according to the condition of the material thing. The consumption of spoiled fruits or vegetables may affect your mood indirectly. Fresh, living fruits infuse you with life, while decay represents the disorganization of matter. You seek to feed on perfect organization that is not too ripe in its prime of life to receive it in that state. Often unconsciously, ignorantly, or even necessarily, we overlook many laws of physical and mental health related to food, air, and heat. As mentioned above, you have always been conditioned by artificial supports. Your dependence began from the very moment of your birth. You may have come into the world with a body that experienced partial development due to artificial and inadequate nourishment, as well as an unnatural life passed down through generations. This artificial life, in a way, leads to suffering. Stimulants, such as alcohol, may provide momentary relief, but often result in a longer period of pain. However, the harm caused by alcohol is relatively small compared to the myriad causes of human ills that operate all around you in crowded environments, and they are often more dangerous because they are unknown. You probably wonder why, even in times of solitude, you cannot maintain a state of serenity and equanimity, something you deeply crave. If you have been physically and of course mentally ill in the past, it is understandable that you would expect instant recovery from such a prolonged illness. However, certain thought patterns cannot be eliminated quickly, but must be modified gradually. The same is true of certain bodily habits that are the result of thought patterns, such as haste, excessive concern for things that are not really necessary at the time, the tendency to take on other people's problems, among others. These habits combined deplete the body, and exhaustion is the underlying cause of most physical problems. Anything that exhausts the body, whether it be movement, positive or negative effort, acts of kindness or selfishness, reduces the ability to resist the many causes of pain and, as a result, leads to depression of the spirit. When the earthly or simpler mentality dominates, we tend to focus on the negative in people and are slow to recognize the good. We often feel affinity for only a few individuals and distaste for many others. However, when the spirit prevails, this perspective is reversed. We begin to see the good in everyone, which attracts us more to them. Finding the good in others, we receive that good in return. Then, we stop being so strongly influenced by individual prejudices. We begin to love more than we hate, whereas when the earthly mentality predominates, we feel more hate than love. We see more aspects to criticize and condemn than to admire. In that state, we are blinded to goodness and are more sensitive to evil, focusing on the negative aspects rather than the positive. We hurt ourselves by holding hatred, having strong prejudices, and reacting negatively at the mention of the name of someone we despise. Having the ability to appreciate and recognize the good in even the most humble circumstances and keeping evil out of our sight is a source of strength, health, and constant growth of power for us. Love is a powerful force and is further strengthened when we are able to admire. Celestial law is based on attraction, while repulsion is an earthly characteristic. Spirituality is naturally attracted to what it recognizes of itself in any environment. We can see the diamond in the rough, even if it is embedded in the most rudimentary rock. We can perceive the seed of excellence in the midst of the roughest nature. By focusing on that seed, we can hide the coarser aspects and exert our power to nurture and give life to that seed. The influence of the highest elevates the lowest in its presence. A true missionary does not need to express his teachings in words. He radiates an atmosphere of divinity that is perceptible to all. The precepts must be felt in the heart. He who harbors prejudices against sinners is like a spiritual porcupine. He wounds everything he touches. As long as we feel a strong repulsion and only see the faults of others, we will remain slaves to that feeling for a long time. We are trapped in its presence, filled with hatred and unable to show the best part of ourselves. In such cases, there is a conflict of opposing wills. Although we are actually the more powerful part, we momentarily become weak. We are compelled to allow the one whom we should be leading by example to exert his power over us. Cynicism arises from personal repulsion and prejudice taken to the extreme. The cynic comes to regard everyone as insufferable and eventually turns against himself. Cynics are never in good health, for cynicism poisons the blood. The cynic is constantly looking for ideals on the outside when he should find them within himself. Once found, he would be able to create ideals in his external environment. The loving spirit that resides in each of us can be like a graft that plants and grows, transforming not only ourselves, but all those with whom we come in contact. Divinity can also be contagious, and it would be a poor divine plan if it allowed only evil to spread. Goodness can be contagious in its own time, and the world will learn that health is also contagious. Unfortunately, until now, humanity has come to admire those who have embraced evil as if they were the only source of inoculation. Any form of good is expected to penetrate fragile human nature through painful and arduous processes. The highest health and strength cannot exist without proper aspiration and pure thoughts. Pure thoughts contribute to purer blood, while impure, negative, pessimistic thoughts full of complaints, blame, and slander will only generate impurities and diseases in the system. Without proper aspiration, all external care and attention to diet will be of little help. You can be meticulously clean in your appearance and pay attention to what you eat, but you would be cleaning only the surface of a vessel that continues to fill with impurities within. As you cultivate greater and greater purity of thought, cleanliness and care of the body will become a natural consequence. The body will self-cleanse. Body care will be an act of love for your own physical form. Bathing will not be a duty, but a source of recreation. Your diet will be regulated according to the natural needs of your appetite. Pleasure and taste will guide your choices, and excesses will be impossible to commit. Your palate will know when enough is enough and will tell you when to stop eating. This constant aspiration for the best and highest is what, over time, leads to a true rebirth of the body, completely transforming its quality and composition: flesh, bones, blood, muscles, and tendons. It is a change in the material structure that aligns with the spiritual. This process of spiritualization of the body is found in all minds that aspire to greatness. When the spirit exercises full dominion over the flesh, total immunity to disease, a strengthening of all faculties and a significantly greater capacity for effort in all areas is achieved. At the end of earthly life, it guarantees a painless transition of the spirit, like a fall into a dream of the earthly body, and an awakening on the other side, on the spiritual plane of existence. The path to self-recovery involves invoking the elements of health and strength through prayer and desire, drawing them to you. Strength and vitality are components of the most refined spirit or matter, and the more you exercise your will to request them, the faster they respond. This is the secret to maintaining and continually increasing vitality or any other desired quality. When you quickly recognize signs of weakness and are sensitive to them, it is time to intensify your requests and desires. Synchronizing with these elements causes strength to flow to you immediately. You may feel tired, but activation of your will trigger an immediate flow of energy as soon as certain conditions for this influx are met. Imagine waking up in the morning feeling weak and exhausted, both physically and mentally. Do your best to keep your mind from focusing on your weakness. Keep your thoughts on strength, vitality, health, and activity. Consciously build this state of mind with the help of mental imagery. Concentrate on symbols of strength and power that you find in nature: the storm and tempest, the rolling waves, the majesty of the ocean, the morning sun emerging in all its splendor to revitalize man, animals, and vegetation. If you find prose or poetry that evokes these feelings in a profound way, turn to them and read them aloud or silently. By doing so, you direct your mind in the right direction to receive the full force. In short, focus on strength and power and you will draw them to you. Concentrate your thoughts on health and you will get it. Avoid getting your mind caught up in thoughts of weakness, the belief that you will never recover, negativity and darkness, for you will attract contrary and harmful elements. Just as decay breeds more decay in the visible world, a weak and decadent thought will attract its fellows from the invisible aspects of life. Unconsciously, many sick and ailing people pay more attention to their complaints than to the bodies that experience them. Their thoughts are constantly focused on their pain, and their conversations revolve around their ailments. In reality, what they crave is sympathy for their suffering rather than for the body affected by it. The sympathy they receive from their friends and loved ones fuels the injury and aggravates the disease. Instead, both the patient and those close to him should focus their thoughts on the idea of a healthy and strong body for the patient. The more they focus on this mental image, the more drawing power they will have to instill vitality in the afflicted. It is important to note that it is not argued here that relief is always instantaneous. A mind that has been unconsciously oriented toward weakness and personal suffering for a long time may not immediately shift its focus to turn towards strength and healing. It may have become accustomed to residing on the dark side of its thoughts and find it difficult to change. However, as you make the effort and persist with it, you will begin to draw more and more power in the desired direction of strength and vitality. The effort is necessary and may take time, but each step in this direction is an accumulation that will never be lost. It is important not to arbitrarily or despotically impose the recovery of any part of the body or the strengthening of any organ or function. Your body is a separate entity from your spirit and has its own peculiar physical life. It is an organization composed of many other organizations, each with its specific function, such as the eye to see, the ear to hear, the tongue to taste, the stomach to digest, and the lungs to breathe. Each of these parts is an individual entity in itself. Each of these organs is receptive to the life-giving and animating influence of the element known as love. This element can envelop a wound with affection and tenderness, not only inspiring delicate and considerate treatment, but also acting as a balm and a force that gradually binds the broken parts together. When we treat a wound with indifference or approach it as an unpleasant task, love not only inspires careless and even rough care, but fails to exert its healing and strengthening power effectively. It is essential to remember that love and hate are opposites in this process. If you mix love with genuine hatred, you will poison the affected party. Hate represents the poison, while love is the healing agent. This same principle and process applies to the weak eye, the impaired ear, or any organ that is diseased or weakened. Sometimes we direct our affection toward the affected organ and ask it with love to regain its strength. Do not underestimate the apparent simplicity of this statement. Try this approach if you ever feel impatience or anger toward your eye or ear because of its inability to function perfectly. By doing so, you will avoid projecting feelings of impatience onto these organs, which would only irritate them and hinder their efforts to do their best. So far, our species has not achieved a relatively perfect life, which would imply a body and life without age and pain, and a life without the present form of physical death. Life in a state of relative perfection would mean that a mind or spirit has accumulated enough power simply by asking and praying for it. In other words, by placing that mind in the proper attitude to attract power, this mind would be able to constantly renew or regenerate the body with fresher, newer, and more refined material. Furthermore, it could decide when to materialize or dematerialize this body at will, as Christ did immediately after his crucifixion. The Jews only destroyed his material body, but the Spirit of Christ had the power to put on a new body. An additional example of this concept can be found in the ascension of the prophet Elijah to heaven. What Elisha, his companion, witnessed was Elijah's spiritual or more subtle body, the counterpart of his material body. This body was composed of an element so refined that it had reached the domain of the divine, and could harness a form of attraction that our scientists recognize as the opposite of gravity, a force that draws upward rather than downward toward the earth. This upward force is called the attraction of aspiration. It originates in any thought or desire to be more noble, refined and free of malice, of ill will toward others, and to do good without imposing conditions. It is a cause, an invisible power that effectively draws you upward, away from the earth and away from any manifestation of denser spirit that we perceive with our physical senses or that seems to be in contact with our body, what we call matter. The aspirational thought sequence is that which you attract from the higher realms of spirit each time you ask, pray, or desire. Thus, you draw to you the invisible element that is integrated into your body and spirit. As a result, you literally begin to be drawn into a greater, broader, and purer realm and element of life that exists in the regions or spheres surrounding our planet. As you persist in this thought of aspiration, your posture straightens. The expression upright man or woman implies that the effect of this invisible element fills you with aspiration both physically and spiritually. Your physical body is straightened as a whole. This current of thought draws your state of mind upward, away from impure or immature thoughts. It also frees you from the selfish and reckless mentality that seeks only personal satisfaction without consideration for others. On the other hand, when you are ruled by the pull of gravity, that is the attraction to material things, your shoulders hunch, your head tilts downward, and your gaze is directed toward the ground. Your heart literally bows down due to sadness, worry, anger, or some kind of immature thinking or attraction towards visible things and the cruder forms of the spirit. All the organs of your body are equally affected and tend toward the earth. There is always a precise and direct correspondence between material things and forms and spiritual things and forms. The body of every man and woman, the expression of their face, all their gestures and mannerisms, even the slightest crease of a finger, are intrinsically related to their spiritual state, or in other words, are a material manifestation of what they are thinking in the spiritual and invisible realm. As the pull of aspiration takes greater control over you, you experience a growing desire to come closer to being like a god or goddess, and an ever stronger determination to overcome any evil within you. This is the only way to overcome any evil outside of you. In addition, this process makes your body stand up more firmly. Your gaze becomes more open and uplifted, your heart rises and your cheeks take on a healthier hue. Your blood becomes increasingly enriched with purer and more powerful elements, giving your limbs strength, vigor, flexibility, and a greater capacity for movement. In doing so, you become increasingly filled with the elixir of life, which is not a myth, but a reality and a spiritual possibility. Until now, our race has been dominated by the attraction of physical things or the visible material world. We have been taught that there is only what we can perceive through our lower external senses, and therefore we have known nothing else. An individual might be thirsty and surrounded by springs of fresh water, but if he has no knowledge of those springs, they will not be available to him. Our present condition resembles that of a more evolved race in the future. In this new state, there will be no painful deaths of the body such as we experience today. Such painful deaths are the direct result of sin and transgression of the law of life. In the future, the transition of the body will consist of the birth or development of a new physical body, while the old one will serve as a temporary shell. As the new body reaches maturity and is ready to emerge, similar to the development of a moth or butterfly from its cocoon, these transformations or transitions will occur at shorter and shorter intervals. Eventually, the spirit will acquire such power that it will be able to will and instantly draw to itself a body from the surrounding elements, using it according to its will in this stratum of life. This is the condition that Paul anticipated when he exclaimed, "O death, where is thy sting?" And again he wrote, "The last great enemy to be overcome is death." I quote Paul because no ancient teacher has more clearly pointed out these possibilities. No doubt these possibilities were known to others, both in recorded and unrecorded human history on this planet, going back to much older periods than is suggested in the Mosaic narrative. These truths, these possibilities of avoiding decay, death and suffering, and of growing and acquiring a new, more revitalized body and life, affect us deeply. We should not regard these statements as relevant only to a race of people from a distant future. These possibilities are for us, and we possess the power to draw abundance and new bodies to us. If we are not informed about these powers, how can we use them? We are like beggars who unknowingly carry a $1,000 bill sewn into the lining of their threadbare coat. This knowledge is a precious jewel to you. You cannot sell this jewel. You can only exchange it for that of your neighbor. You cannot accumulate the powers of others. You can only cultivate and use your own. You may ask, can these truths and wonders be applicable in our times and in our everyday times? But our times and times are not ordinary or prosaic. It is our lack of vision that makes our times seem ordinary. We live surrounded by the same elements and possess the same powers to a greater or lesser extent. Just as the 3 Jewish youths emerged unscathed from the fire and the prophet Daniel, through the exercise of higher human thought, appeased the ferocity of the lions, so too do we have the potential to influence our surroundings. The pit where Paul was delivered from the serpent's venom, where the man from Nazareth performed his wonders, was it not the power of God, you may ask? Yes, it is the power of God, or of the infinite and incomprehensible Spirit of eternal good working through His children, just as that same power can work through us. The more we invoke it, seek it, importune it, and trust it, the more potent will be the influence of the higher mind upon the lower mind. In simpler terms, every visible or material element is a manifestation of the lower mind. Rocks, hills, clouds, waves, trees, animals, and human beings are various expressions of the lower mind in its different levels of development and evolution. The power of mind over matter implies the dominion of the higher mind over all manifestations of the lower mind. Sincere aspiration, genuine prayer, or desire to improve, to acquire more power, and to refine ourselves will attract to us subtler elements and forces, i.e., spirit. However, it is essential that the motive behind this desire is the sincere yearning of the heart to share what we receive with others. We cannot fully invoke this power if our intention is to live solely for our own benefit. We may achieve some degree of success with it, but if our life is centered exclusively on ourselves, our pursuit will ultimately bring pain, sickness, and disillusionment due to selfish motives. Adherence to a new thought represents a new life. When an idea or a discovery first bursts into the mind of the inventor, he is filled with joy. The blood flows with renewed impetus through his veins. Creative authors and poets are uplifted by a new inspiration. I mean those genuinely creative authors and poets, not those who, borrowing the genius of others, present it as their own with success on many occasions. Good news during a period of melancholy, depression, or discouragement may represent the possibility of hope. The removal of an evil or danger is, in essence, a thought, a mental image of the desired thing, not the thing itself. However, as this mental image fills the whole body with power, a captivating spectacle, a perfectly acted drama that captures full attention, a conversation with someone who deeply attracts us, an activity, exercise, or art that interests and fascinates us, all of these act as food and nourishment, stimulating the body. In the process of absorption or excitement of the moment, we may even forget or temporarily lose our appetite for material food. Our natures do not feed on bread alone. They always demand new food of thought. A play, however exciting the first time, may become monotonous with repetition. The air, though fascinating at first, can lose its charm with familiarity. Sometimes we long for a change in the quality of our thoughts, something we find more appealing. I refer to all these changes, but only for a time. Plays, operas, or artists may be revisited over time and enjoyed even more. This may be due to the influence of inner reflection, new nuances and developments in the artist's interpretation, or our own newly acquired ability to perceive what previously went unnoticed. So we might consider each new thought and even each new emotion as a kind of nourishment. It is as essential for men and women to be physically and relatively perfect as the bread we eat. We always crave fresh food, just as we always desire and need new thoughts. Stagnation in old thoughts, constant repetition of the same ideas, leads to decay and sluggishness of both mind and body. Imagine waking up every morning with the absolute certainty that the day ahead will thrill us by discovering something useful and pleasurable, both for ourselves and for others, something that is sustainable for eternity, perhaps an unexpected extension of the truth we discovered yesterday, which seemed fully developed, something that shows us how life can be even more full of genuine, harmless joy. Sometimes some of the great principles of law in nature may have been recognized for the first time in phenomena that were previously considered insignificant. For example, the fall of a leaf or its change of color due to the coming of autumn and cold weather. The vibrancy of its colors, resembling the arrival of spring warmth, reveals these principles in action. Imagine the pleasure an open and receptive mind would experience in finding an argument today for improving the quality that seemed hopeless yesterday. An increase in patience in tackling challenging tasks, an increase in courage, an increase in perception, to appreciate the beauty in what previously went unnoticed with indifference, an increase in the power to control rebellious desires, an increase in the ability to dispel unpleasant thoughts, which are ultimately harmful. Wouldn't these thoughts be encouraging and revitalizing, infusing life and health? This constant focus on adhering to ever new thoughts knows no limits in any direction. It could be said that if you are tidy today, you will find the strength, space, and ability to be even tidier tomorrow. If your last effort focused on music, painting, composition, acting, or public speaking, you will find that you can improve your art even more tomorrow. This does not detract from your previous effort. Rather, it is like applying an even more beautiful and delicate nuance to an already impressive painting. The awareness of this constant growth toward improvement is food for the developing mind, different from bread. However, bread is the staple of life and should be craved as part of our daily routine. Wouldn't it also be beneficial to remember each morning that great power and an infinitely wise mind are always available to provide additional knowledge that will help you overcome external and internal challenges? Wouldn't this thought and the confidence that emanates from it be healthy and stimulating food? This is especially true when the reality of this power and its ability to provide help has been repeatedly demonstrated, so that hope has become conviction. This grants the possibility that the new thought is a healthy stimulus and a necessary nourishment for a more perfected life. The question then arises, how do we achieve this? In other words, how can we attune ourselves or become more receptive to all that is beautiful and useful in nature? In our religion, the useful always implies the beautiful. It is an insufficient response to simply say, live a pure life. This implies in numerous cases an innate inclination that must be overcome, along with multiple difficulties and conditions necessary to carry out such a challenging life. To achieve this, it is essential to address both internal and external aspects. The desire for accumulation seems to be a basic law of our nature in its simplest functioning. One who accumulates wealth in its highest form would accumulate mental powers and qualities. I am $500 richer today than I was this morning, the accumulator of wealth says with satisfaction. It is his source of joy at the end of the day. This pleasurable thought is like the bread of life, but it is not the food of a lasting or healthy life. In my case, I can affirm at night, I am richer today than I was this morning because of greater patience, a little more skill or ability in my art, and certain knowledge I was unaware of 24 hours ago. We are fully aware that we are receptacles of thought, knowledge, and power, and that our capacity to receive all this is unlimited. We also understand that the supply of knowledge, power, and new thought in the universe is equally unlimited, and that it is all at our disposal to be drawn from. This supply cannot be exhausted, just as eternity has no end. In your past life, there are thousands of things, events, and scenes that it is more beneficial to forget than to remember. By forgetting, you open the door to a new idea, which is actually a new life. Remembering, on the other hand, hinders the arrival of that new idea and life. When I mention forgetting, I mean avoiding focusing exclusively on unpleasant scenes and memories from the past. To completely erase from memory anything you have ever taken note of is impossible, since everything you have seen, learned, felt, or heard is stored and can resurface under certain circumstances. Instead of forgetting, it would be more appropriate to say that you must cultivate the ability to put out of your mind and keep out of your sight. Anything that makes you unhappy or that you have discovered is not beneficial to remember. It is impossible to completely eliminate anything that has been written on the tablets of your memory, because regardless of the nature of the scene, event, or experience, they have all become a part of your true self or spirit. In other words, your spirit is shaped by all the experiences and memories that stretch into an infinite past. Some of these memories are sharp, others are vague, and many remain buried out of sight in the present moment, but all are capable of being summoned to memory under certain circumstances. Destroying such memories, if possible, would be tantamount to destroying a significant part of your mind. All experiences are valuable for the wisdom they bring or suggest, but once you have gained wisdom and knowledge from any experience, repeating it, especially if it was unpleasant, is useless. In fact, By remembering or reliving such an experience, you are repeating it in your thinking. This is what is done by those who obsess over past misfortunes and disappointments, or when they look back with regret on their youth in contrast to their mature or advanced age. If you wish to remember your youth with joy, and it does you good, go ahead. But do not place it with its brightness and freshness in contrast to the dark present. Avoid thinking of it that way. Remember that the time of your childhood and youth with all its freshness and newness was also the time of old age for other people, when the world seemed stale and joyless to them, when all that life seemed to offer them was exhausted, and nothing remained but decay and death. Remember also that if today the world seems less bright than before, if the sun seems to set instead of rising, this is what children and young people of 10 or 15 years old feel today, just as you felt at that age. No person could maintain his physical body and enjoy life if he constantly lived in the past, refusing to open his mind to the future. In doing so, he accumulates more of the old and relatively inert thought, and this element materializes in his body. His flesh, bones, and blood then become a real expression of a spirit that is dead and inert. Living carrying an ever-increasing burden can only result in weakness and misery as far as the spirit can bear it. But a mind that rejects the old that no longer serves it and always seeks the new, constantly adds new thought to itself. This newness of ideas will produce a newer body. In fact, you make the old things pleasant or unpleasant to you according to how you think of them beforehand. There are people who, when faced with difficulties and a solution is proposed to them, immediately raise objections and find problems in the suggested plan. The funny thing is that by finding difficulties in thought, we are actually creating those difficulties. Spending sleepless nights ruminating, devising, thinking over, or inventing possible problems is an ineffective and counterproductive use of our energy, as we are preparing the ground for those problems. In all matters of life, we must focus our minds on success. We must visualize in our mind or imagination the project we plan to complete, the system or method we are organizing and how it will work, the enterprise moving forward and growing ever stronger and more profitable. Spending time and energy looking back and reliving past problems or obstacles, and from that mental and emotional activity, anticipating more difficulties or opposition, is essentially wasting time and energy in sabotaging our own path to success. Forgetting what is behind and moving forward with determination is a principle that has multiple practical applications and is fundamental to achieving success in any endeavor. Those who abandon outdated methods and embrace the new often achieve the greatest financial success. True leaders are those who from their youth are willing to adopt innovative approaches and, as they age, continue to support what was innovative in their youth and has now matured. While they may continue to earn revenue, if their methods do not evolve, they will eventually see their businesses overtaken by more modern systems. If at some point in the past you felt weak or sick, don't start today with the thought anchored in that weakness. It is important to forget it completely and walk away from that thought. Instead, focus on the idea of being strong and healthy at that very moment. When you look back in your mind and dwell on the thought of yesterday's illness, weakness, or discomfort, you are actually creating the conditions for experiencing the same physical problems. But if at the beginning of the day you focus on thoughts of health and strength at the time you felt out of energy, you are creating the conditions for experiencing that health and strength. If you don't see results right away, keep trying the next day. The state you wish to achieve will take time, but you can begin to try it by experimenting with any of the methods suggested for thought work here. You will find that it is beneficial and you will be able to experience it for yourself. You need not have absolute faith in this law, but if you test it to some extent, it is reasonable to believe that you will be able to demonstrate even more if you continue in that direction. Irrational prejudices arise from constantly living in the past. Older people in their 60s or 70s often cling to the moods, habits, and customs of their youth, considering them the most appropriate for them. A person is likely to look with disapproval and prejudice on someone who in their daily life wears knee breeches, stockings, vest, ruffled shirt, and wide-brimmed hat from the 18th century. However, only 100 years ago, this style was common, and your great-grandfather probably wore it. But in turn, your great-grandfather would likely have looked down on someone dressed in today's fashions with contempt and prejudice. So within a few years, these two irrational prejudices have arisen, passed down from great-grandfather to great-grandson, based solely on the peculiarity of the fashions of one's youth. It is practically impossible for a person to go against the prevailing custom or fashion, to dress or live differently, without facing unpleasant and even harmful results. This is because the action of many minds sending out thoughts of prejudice, dislike or ridicule toward one tends to damage both mind and body. However, the feeling that drives these types of thoughts towards someone who chooses to depart from established customs, especially when that choice does not affect the peace or comfort of others, is a grave error. It represents a form of mental and rational tyranny that looks with hostility upon someone who, for example, chooses to dress like the ancient Greeks, an attire that is actually more sensible and comfortable than what was worn less than 200 years ago. A similar sentiment assailed the person who introduced the first umbrella in England. This feeling stems from the ingrained tendency in the mind to cling to the past and resist the new. Life is a constant forward movement. Everyone, even those who may seem dull, uncouth, or perverse, moves forward driven by a powerful, eternal, and incomparable force. However, many stop and look back, unconsciously opposing this force. By focusing on the past, they are inviting evil, pain, disease, and anguish. That which the mind focuses on or keeps in view is what it draws to itself. Continuous thoughts and imaginings eventually take form and materialize in the world of visible and tangible things. I reiterate this statement often because it is the basis of your happiness or misery, of your lasting health and prosperity, and even of poverty. It is essential to keep this in mind as much as possible. Our thought is like an invisible magnet that always attracts its equivalent in the things we can see and touch. As we become aware of this, we will be more careful to direct our thoughts in the right direction. We will become more and more concerned to think of happiness and success rather than misery and failure. It is truly amazing that the happiness or misery of our lives should depend upon a seemingly simple law and method. But things that seem simple in nature, when investigated, often reveal deep and incomprehensible mysteries. What intrigues us most is discovering the cause or agent that produces a specific result. When we realize that we can influence who we are in terms of health, wealth, and position through our thoughts, we also recognize that we have found in ourselves a jewel of great value. We rush to share this knowledge with others, urging them to seek and find in themselves this jewel and this power. For no one is impoverished by finding what can only be theirs, and all become richer and happier as each discovers their jewel and contributes to the overall wealth and happiness. Life is much richer in possibilities for pleasure than we have come to believe. Real life involves continuous and perpetual growth, preserving the physical body so that it is always available to the spirit when it so desires. This means keeping the body not only free from pain and disease, but also away from the weakness and deterioration commonly associated with old age, which in reality is simply the result of the wear and tear of the instrument used by the spirit due to lack of knowledge to regenerate it on a constant basis. Life means developing in us powers and pleasures that surpass the imagination of fiction in its highest moments. It involves a constant increase of freshness, perception, and realization of what is great, wonderful, and beautiful in the universe. It is a continual and astonishing discovery, a growing capacity to experience deeper and deeper emotions and joys. Life is eternal in the exploration and realization of these joys, for their source is infinite. The quality and character of these experiences are unknown until we experience them, and as mentioned in the apostolic record, eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor has it come into the heart of man what God has prepared for those who love him. In everyday things, we experience only a tiny fraction of the pleasure that our lives and senses are capable of bringing us. Our food, for example, has the potential to delight our senses of taste even more than we currently experience. Similarly, our senses of sight and hearing have the capacity to give us much more pleasure in more developed and refined bodies. When food enters the stomach, it should act as a healthy stimulant, infusing vigor, vitality, and energy, similar to the vivacity of a young animal. Every movement of the muscles, such as walking, can be a source of pleasure by following the spiritual laws. In the future, many people will experience a profound peace of mind that will surpass any previous understanding. The fact that this reality has not yet been achieved in the past is not evidence that it cannot be achieved. In that scenario, life, whether active or at rest, will be a perpetual Elysium. However, millions of people in our society do not contemplate these joyous possibilities, as they have never been aware of them. Most do not believe in their existence and continue to cling to the belief that life is short, old age and deterioration are inevitable, and that everyone is destined to experience them. The idea has taken root that as the body ages, its faculties inevitably diminish, and that, as a result, everyone will end up as frail elders. As a result, many people consider accumulating a financial reserve for old age to be a fundamental goal in life. While these prospects are not pleasant to think about, most accept them as grim realities for their future. Despite their fears, these beliefs are powerful and persistent. Those who hold them must continue to reinforce them through their thinking. It is this constant forward pressure that turns beliefs into tangible, material realities. The preconception of aging can precipitate the aging process in the body, as those who see themselves this way for years tend to feel vulnerable and weakened. What the mind projects into the future is, in the process of manifesting in the future. Often, we rely on material resources such as money to protect us from misfortunes, yet all material possessions are powerless to prevent such adversities. A wealthy man, even if he has financial resources, cannot prevent the deterioration and sickness of his body as he ages. He can afford a more comfortable room and a higher quality bed than a poor man, but his wealth cannot prevent sickness and infirmity. Money may provide expensive food, but in times of pain and suffering, both the emperor and the pauper are on equal footing. Even in the bed of opulence, extreme misery offers no consolation. In all this, it is evident that thought, when directed in the wrong direction due to ignorance, leads to pitiable results. Only by cultivating the power of the spirit over the body can we avoid these evils. This power begins to develop and strengthen when we recognize and believe that the mind or spirit is the force that governs our bodies. Whatever the mind persistently thinks or imagines is manifesting at this moment. Often, unconsciously, we imagine in the wrong direction. We assume that aging and deterioration of the body is inevitable because it has always been that way. Our imagination and unwanted beliefs push towards sadness and physical decline. We keep these bleak images in our minds because we lack faith in a brighter vision of life, a life that is constantly improving. In the New Testament, the ultimate revelation, we find Christian and apostolic teaching full of the essence of life and eternal life. Death is not presented as an absolute necessity, but as an enemy that will ultimately be defeated. It is never stated or implied that great revelations must wait millions and millions of years to manifest. The awakening of this revelation can be now. It is happening right now. It is not based on the words or claims of a single individual, but on the opening of many minds that are ready to receive this great revelation. For centuries, this revelation has been knocking at the door of humanity, but has been unable to enter because of the stubbornness and deafness of those it was intended to awaken and benefit. In the universe, the only ones who can be considered dead are the spiritually dead, those mired in sins and crimes they have not yet learned to leave behind. Or rather, those who refuse to live by relying on the relatively inert element of earth rather than connecting with a higher source. However, the few who are in the forefront and moving forward on this path proclaim that the greatest of all driving forces is right before us. Human thought is a real entity and a force emanating from the mind, similar to electricity. Every man and woman can hurt or heal, kill or cure, build fortunes or destroy them through their thought. It works for good or evil at every moment, day or night, asleep or awake, molding and shaping people's lives, beautifying them or making them less pleasant. Before you invest so much time in serving others, Ask yourself if you don't have the power to transform yourself into a living agent of change. Consider whether, together with others, you can demonstrate that health and vitality can replace old age, that all disease can be banished from the body, and that material prosperity can be derived from laws and methods that are not now widely practiced. It raises the possibility that life is not something brief, unsatisfying, and hopeless, even at its best, but that it can be more than that in the present. Your contribution to the world could be 100 times greater if you directed your thinking toward these goals rather than simply meeting some physical needs or alleviating the hunger of a few. Look at the wealthiest people, leaders, leading figures in art, science, and other fields, and you will notice that in many cases they face weakness, decay, and disease in their old age. The most thoughtful people come to the conclusion that once they have learned something from life, it is time to leave. However, humanity demands more than that. This cry has been growing for centuries and is finally being answered, first by a few and then by many. New light, new knowledge, and innovative results in human life and in all its aspects are coming into our world.
Thank you for joining us on this enlightening journey through The God in You by Prentice Mulford. May the wisdom and insights shared in this audiobook serve as a guiding light on your path to self-realization and spiritual awakening. As you continue your journey, may you always remember the divine spark that resides within you, illuminating your way to a life filled with love, joy, and infinite possibilities.